Now, to be completely honest, Sherry asked me this morning, she says, "What are you preaching on this morning?" And I said, "Nothing." And honestly, that is an honest answer. Because if you would have asked me Friday what I was preaching on this Sunday, my answer would have been, I've got nothing. You know, I've been doing this for 30-some years here, and some of you poor people have had to suffer through most of my sermons. And for that, I apologize, but for whatever reason, you're still here. But at any rate, the last couple of weeks, I had, it seemed like, all week long with a theme going through my head, you know. And this week, nothing. Nothing. And it was finally Friday night, Saturday morning, God says, now you know how everybody else feels whenever they pray for something and they don't feel or hear a response. So if you would, turn with me to Exodus chapter 2. I want to give you an ultimate example of hearing nothing from God. And it's a very familiar passage that you know, as Sherry mentioned in her children's moment, all the stories in the Bible were true, and this is one that we should know. But I want us to look at maybe a little bit behind the scenes and try and relate that to our lives. Chapter 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was beautiful, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got him a wicker basket and covered it over with tar and pitch. Then she put the child in it and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to find out what would happen to him. This is because the Pharaoh was concerned about the Hebrews growing so fast that he ordered that all male children be drowned in the Nile River once they were born. Let me continue on. Verse 5. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came to bathe at the Nile with her maidens. Walking alongside the Nile, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid, and she brought it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the boy was crying. And she had pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go ahead." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I shall give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses and said, "Because I drew him out of the water." Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up, that he went out to his brethren and looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew with one of his brethren. And he looked this way and that, and when he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And he went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" But he said, "Who made you a prince or judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." When Pharaoh heard of this matter, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from the presence of Pharaoh and settled in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flocks. Then the shepherds came and drove them away. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flocks. When they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "Why have you come back so soon today?" So they said, "An Egyptian delivered us from the hand of the shepherds. And what is more, he even drew the water for us and watered the flock." And he said to his daughters, "Where is he then? Why is it that you have left the man behind? Invite him to have something to eat." And Moses was willing to dwell with the man, and he gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses. And then she gave birth to a son and named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." Now it came about in the course of many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God saw the sons of Israel and took notice of them. Probably two of the most memorable events, for us anyway, in Moses' life was the one I read earlier, to where whenever he was born and his mother saw how beautiful it was, which honestly, he could have looked like a dirt fence and she'd have still thought he was beautiful. Isn't that right, moms? Come on. And if not, just show him to grandma and they're going to say, oh, it's such a beautiful child. Why has he got hair all over his face? It doesn't matter. He's beautiful. But they saw how beautiful he was, and they said, I can't follow the orders of the Pharaoh on this. And so she made a basket, and she covered it with tar and pitch, and she hid him in the reeds along the Nile River. And then her sister, the mother's sister, kept a watch out. We know the story. Pharaoh's daughter comes by, sees the basket, hears probably the cry, sends somebody after it. The sister comes up and says, would you like me to find one of the Hebrew women to nurse a child for you? I just happen to know one who's lactating right now. And, oh yeah, do that. You take him home and feed him and raise him up and get him weaned and then bring him to me and I'll raise him as my son. One of the most memorable stories in the Bible about Moses is whenever he was rescued out of the Nile River. The second one that we probably remember the most is whenever Moses was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt and he came to the Red Sea with the Egyptian army right behind him, and God says, raise your staff, and the waters parted and they went through. What I want to look at a little bit and talk about a little bit today is that time in between the first event that we remember and the next event that we remember the most. Keep in mind that Moses was a Hebrew, and he got to be raised, at least up until he was weaned, by his own mother. And his own mother, or I believe in my heart with fullest conviction, that she embedded within him all the principles and everything that she could about telling him all about God, even from the time he was born up to the time that she had to take him to the Pharaoh's daughter to live there. She wanted this child to know everything that she could about her people, his people, and the God that they served. Because he was going to go to a palace to where they had all kinds of pagan religions and all kinds of practices that were not like what they would have been. And the reason I say that this happened was because you see here that after he has grown up, that he sees the affliction that the taskmasters are putting on the Hebrews, and he has compassion for them. And this is like, he's 40 years old at this point. And he sees a Hebrew or an Egyptian taskmaster beating up on a Hebrew and mistreating him. And so he checks both ways, makes sure nobody's around, nobody can see him, and he kills that Egyptian taskmaster. And then he hides him in the sand. By the time, I'm sure his thought process was, by the time anyone finds the body in the sand, it's going to be enough time, it's going to be elapsed, and nobody can tie the two together, and it will go down as an unsolved murder mystery. And he will be free and clear. Plan looked like it was going great. Nobody saw him, kills the guy, buries him in the sand, goes about his business. Next day, while he's out walking around, he sees two Hebrews fighting amongst themselves, and he comes to one, he says, "Why are you fighting amongst yourselves? You're both on the same team here." And the guy says, "What are you going to do? Kill me like you did the guy yesterday?" And he realizes that he missed somebody whenever he was looking around. And when the Pharaoh heard about it, he was out to kill Moses. Can't you think that probably the Pharaoh wasn't real thrilled about having a Hebrew living in his own house all this time? Now then, what I see in this is that Moses had a compassion for his people. He knew he was different. He knew that he wasn't a true born blood Egyptian. And so he had a compassion for his people. But yet he didn't relate to them. I mean, all the people that he felt sorry for, he never had to experience anything that they were going through. I mean, he lived in a palace. He had the finest education. He had the finest foods. His workload was walking around seeing what was going on. I mean, he had it made. And yet he saw what everybody else that his family was going through, and he hurt for them. Now, I'm sure that he probably had some ridiculing from other people who says, you're not one of us. He probably thought he had it rough at times. But really, compared to everybody else, he knew they had it rough, but yet he couldn't relate. And so he decides he's going to take matters in his own hands. But don't you think that before that actually happened, that he prayed for his people? Don't you think that he saw his brothers and sisters and maybe family members and aunts and uncles and all the Hebrew people? Don't you think he prayed, God, get them out of this, free them from this slavery, get them out of this? And what happened? Nothing. So it seemed nothing was happening. And by the time he was 40, maybe he thought, God's not going to do anything about this. Maybe I need to do something about this. And so he kills the guy, hides the body, thinks he gets away with it, finds out he didn't. At that point in his life, he goes and he runs from the Pharaoh, ends up in Midian, and he goes to a well. Shepherd is bringing their sheep there, and the other shepherds were keeping them from it. And so he runs them off, helps them water their sheep, and the girls go home and they tell their dad, and they says, how'd you get home so quick? Well, this guy looks like an Egyptian. He came and he helped us. And he not only helped us, he even watered our sheep for us. That's why we got home so quick. Bring that boy home. Turns out he ends up marrying one of the daughters. And he spends the next 40 years of his life following around a bunch of sheep. Now, just imagine the drastic change that this guy went through. He went from sleeping on the best sheets, on the most comfortable mattresses, in the most climate-controlled palace that he could, to where he's looking for a good rock to lay his head at night. Watching sheep. Sounds like fun, doesn't it? And he does this for 40 years. And during this time, I'm sure that his prayers went from, Lord, deliver them people to help me through this. And the response that he kept getting, nothing. Nothing. Nothing's happening. I mean, I went from the palace to out here. Time's tough. It's uncomfortable. I don't like this very much. I don't know what else to do. Seems like I'm praying and I'm praying and I'm praying, but God's not listening. God's apparently not hearing my prayer, or he's just flat out said no. Have you ever felt like that? This has been going on for 80 years now. 80 years. And how long have you been praying for that miracle in your life? 80 years. If you read the next passage of Scripture, and I encourage you to do it, it's whenever God appears to Moses in the burning bush. And at that point, even though that Moses has given up on God and given up on himself, he argues with God about going to do what God's called him to do, but he eventually goes. Because God finally just gets mad at him. And he takes away all of his excuses. Now, the thing about praying to God is that, and I don't know if this is the right right comparison or not, but have you noticed that when you look back on things that's already happened, how you can see those 2020, and you start seeing, well, this happened, and this happened, and this happened. I didn't notice it at the time, but it all led to something else. And so the old phrase, hindsight's 2020, that means that foresight is like Braille, and you don't know how to read Braille. Can't see it for looking at it. And this is what Moses had went through all of his life. Why wasn't God doing something? From growing up to a little boy living in the palace, feeling compassion for his people, and yet God wasn't doing a thing. Does something on his own, goes and hides, spends the next 40 years following sheep, living out in the wilderness. Still, God's not doing anything. Ever felt like that? I'm sure you have if you've ever prayed and really believed in prayer. But I want us to go to the hindsight and start looking. Whenever you think about why isn't God doing something, we first have to go back and say, why can I not see what God's doing? And it's then we have to ask ourselves, is it really important that I see what he's doing? What all led to Moses being rescued from the river was Pharaoh saying, these guys are multiplying so fast that if we let them keep growing like this, they're going to overpower us and we're going to lose our nation. So let's have all the male children drowned in the river. What if he had never issued that order? What if Pharaoh would have never said, let's drown all the male babies in the Nile River and be done with it? What if he had never done that? Moses would have been born to his mother. He would have went and become a slave just like everybody else, and he would have been just one in the crowd. That's all he would have been. He would have been a servant, slave, just like everybody else. His life, instead of living in the palace, it would have been gathering straw and bricks to make bricks with. We would have never heard of him. We would have never known him. Point being, God started the solution to the prayers that Moses prayed before Moses was even born. He picked out Moses, and everything fell into place that he would go from being a slave to living in the palace. While he was in the palace, he learned everything that he could learn about the Egyptian way of life. He learned why they did the things they did, how come they did the things they did. He learned everything about them. And let me tell you, if you're going to go to battle against an enemy, the best thing you can have is all the information you can get on him. He was educated. He was healthy. Everything was in his favor. I mean, he had it made. Problem of it was, after God had set him up for that, with all the education and all the information, he never had the relationship with his own people because he couldn't really relate to what it was like to be a slave whenever you're living in the palace. It's pretty hard from going to satin sheets to a rock for a pillow and say, oh yeah, I can relate. And so for the next 40 years, God put Moses through a training program to where he taught them how to actually and why to have compassion for his people, what they were going through, what they were suffering from. Because otherwise, they would have never related. Remember when the two Hebrews that were fighting amongst themselves? And he called them out, and instead of just breaking up, and they didn't say, oh, well, yeah, we were right. We shouldn't have been doing that. They says, who do you think you are? They had no use for him. You can't relate. It's like, let me put it this way for you. If somebody tells you how you should be doing whatever it is you're doing that has no experience whatsoever in doing it, how much do you listen to them? be like me trying to tell a nuclear scientist what he was doing wrong. I don't have a clue. And so they had no use for Moses because he couldn't relate. And Moses couldn't relate. So God put him through a 40-year training program so that he could go and actually become the person that God wanted him to be. And do the thing that God had been working on for more than the last 80 years, and that was to deliver his people out of Egypt and bring them into their own nation. It was a long process, but it was a process that was necessary in order to get everything in place. Now, the thing I like about God whenever he starts working on something is he makes sure that every piece of the puzzle is in the right place. He doesn't just look at it and say, let's forget that and let's just skip to the last page. Sherry was talking about reading books and stuff. I've heard people say that they always read the last chapter first so they know how it's going to turn out. That's how we pray, isn't it? You know, we want to know how it's going to turn out. And then if we know it's going to turn out right, then, okay, yeah, we'll pray. And if we don't like the ending, yeah, let's find another book. God was working all the time, and you can see it in everything that Moses did whenever you look back upon it. Moses just couldn't see it because he was living it. Whenever we go through a time in our life that we're praying for something to change and nothing seems to be happening, there's a couple things that I think is important for us. Just so that I get them right. First thing I think that we need to do whenever we know that we're praying for something that just doesn't seem to be working and nothing seems to be changing, our first rule should be don't make it worse. Don't make it worse. You know, Moses had a compassion for his people. You know, killing that guy really didn't benefit him at all. And it sure didn't benefit the guy that he killed. So don't make your situation worse because you're tired of waiting on God. And yet it's our natural tendency to do something like that. You know, don't make it worse. Second thing, and I think this is very important, and that is to search your own heart and really be honest with yourself and say, you know, God, is there something in me that's causing this long delay? Are you trying to work something in me so that this will work? Because I know you're not going to halfway do it. You're going to do it right. So is there something that I need to be working on, something that I need to change so that what I'm praying for can actually come to pass? Or better yet, what needs to be done, and this is even more important, what needs to be done actually gets accomplished. Is it me? What do I need to do? What do I need to do? And third is to abide in the Lord. Notice whenever Moses went from the palace into hiding, what was the first thing he did? He went to the well and he helped somebody else. He didn't say, oh, you don't know the troubles that I've got. You think you have put up these shepherds. I've got a whole Egyptian army looking for me, and they're going to kill me if they find me. Instead, he says, you know, how can I help you? How can I do what is right, even though God's not answering my prayer right now, it doesn't seem like, but I'm still going to do what's right in his sight. Because I do not want to put myself out of position for God to use me. You know, one of the most important positions that I think that we can get is put ourselves in a place to where God can bless us. And that means getting right with him, to wait on him, to listen for him, and just be patient with him. And the last thing is to know that God is working. To know that God really is working. You know, I've been a firm believer for years that God is working on our solution before we even know we have a problem. And whenever you know that in your heart and you believe that in your heart, you keep praying But you trust that God's going to make it work one way or another. May not be the way I had it planned out, because he's going to do it right. But to know that God is on his throne, that God is doing what needs to be done, and he's going to do it right the first time and not have to redo it later. How many times have we done something and we cut a few corners only so that we'd have to go back and do it again? You know, in carpentry work, there's a lot of times that, you know, we're faced with an option and well, I can either cut a corner here and do this and kind of get us by for a while. But the problem with that is, not too long, you're going to have to come back in, you're going to have to tear all that out, start all over. Guess which one costs more? Doing it right the first time or having to redo it later? Every time. Every time. God doesn't work that way. And we should be ever so thankful for that. But if the heavens are silent and God, it seems like it's not listening, it's because he's lining up everything the way it needs to be lined up. And you know, sometimes I feel like that I've been more guilty of being in his way than I have been being in his path. In other words, instead of helping him by getting myself right, I'm getting in his way. I'm making matters worse because I'm taking it on myself and not letting him have a chance. You know, my prayer life used to be that, God, this is what needs to be done. This is what I need you to do. And, okay, I'm through praying now. Guess you're not doing it, so I'm going to do it myself. That never worked. Never does. But to go from that to saying, you know, Lord, you know the problem. You know the situation. You know what I'm dealing with. And you know all the factors more than I do. So I'm going to wait on you. I'm going to trust you. Because you've been working on it longer than I even knew it was going on. Moses learned the hard way, just like many of us have. He learned the hard way that God was answering his prayer even before he started praying it. Whatever situation we might find ourselves in, take courage, take encouragement. God's working on it, and he's going to do it right. Think of the disciples on that Thursday whenever they saw their Savior, their Lord, arrested. This can't happen. Think of again on Friday when they saw him hanging on the cross. This can't be right. This can't be right. Now then, fast forward to the third day. God solved the problem that we had, and it was our sin, and he paid it all. Just whenever everything looked its darkest, that's whenever God shined through ever so brightly. And he wants to do it with you, and he wants to do it with me, and he wants to do it in this church, he wants to do it in this community. But I believe we need to pray, and we need to wait, and we need to trust. This morning, as we've gathered here for worship, if God's been speaking to your heart, or maybe he's not been speaking, maybe you haven't heard him, would you trust him? Would you believe him? Would you wait on him? As we stand to sing the hymn of invitation, if you need prayer, you need help, need anything at all, I want you to respond as the Spirit leads you. I Surrender All, number 579.